Hi there, friends and followers. It's Chris Sarandon, and as promised, I'm recording the answers to a number of your questions that we didn't get to do on Facebook Live. Thank you very much, Facebook. So the beginning of the Q&A, I'll start by the way I started in the one that was interrupted. And the question was, how long did you do your Fright Night makeup? Depending on the makeup. That is the early Jerry makeup, which was sort of, semi-crazy vampire. Probably took an hour or two. But the final version, the one in which Jerry comes up out of the coffin and Nosferatu style and has that extraordinary crazy face with ears and hands, that took 8 hours. I would go into the makeup trailer at 4 a.m. in the morning, and Kenny Diaz, the guy who was the FX makeup guy, would be sleeping literally in a cubby in the trailer, so he didn't have to go home and then get up right away in the morning and come back that early. He would pop down. He had sort of frizzy hair and a big bushy beard. And he'd say, "Let's go, man! Come on, let's do this thing." And we would start. And one of the things that I had to do, just because I was going crazy, basically sitting still, waiting for all of these pieces to be applied and then blended, because there was no one large piece that went over and then that was blended in. These were small pieces that went together to create the illusion. So that he put the fingers on first, the famous Jerry fingers, which, by the way, are now owned by the director, Mike Flanagan, he of Midnight Mass and The Fall of the House of Usher, etc. A wonderful director and a lovely guy who did a podcast with me, by the way. And the fingers would go on. He'd blend the fingers with latex, and then I would make them up. I had a background in the theater, and we always did our own makeup, so I kind of, had a feel for it, and I enjoyed that part of the process. And then from 4 a.m. to 12 p.m., Kenny would make me up and then go on set and work the rest of the day, go to sleep, get up the next morning and do the same thing. And I think we did that for maybe close to a week, possibly. At any rate, that's my memory of my Fright Night makeup. And let's see, what's the next question here? The strangest encounter with a fan, which I had, by the way, recently. A woman from Brazil who was convinced that she and I were somehow connected spiritually because I had played a vampire, and she looked like someone who would be a vampire's companion. A very interesting, very unfortunately, sadly unhinged woman. And she spent literally a day at a convention sort of hanging around and giving me a really weird stare, and finally was asked to leave because a lot of people were getting spooked out by her, quite frankly. So I hope she's okay, but she was an unsettling presence on the con floor. And it sort of leads into the next question. Have you ever had a paranormal experience? Yes, actually, sort of once. A long time ago, I was close friends with a wonderful actress named Colleen Dewhurst. And Colleen was a believer in the spiritual world. And she and our mutual friend Elizabeth Wilson, another wonderful actress, whom you would know if you looked her up, they decided they were going to have a seance. So we were visiting Colleen. At the time, I was, I think, working on a play with her. And and she had an old part of her home that went back to the 17th century. And it was all sort of stone walls around, and it was a very interesting and very, saturated with spirit of some kind place. And so they decided they were going to have the seance there, and they set up a table, and a bunch of us sat around the table. And midway through the seance, something happened to all the men at the table. There were 3 or 4 of us. We all were at some point struck by what seemed like a cattle prod and were knocked backwards off of our chairs. That's as paranormal as I'd ever like to get. And by the way, we decided we'd never have a seance in that room again for, for obvious reasons. All right, next question. How do you get into character with specific acting methods? Question mark. Well, it's a good question. It depends on the character, or it depends on the writing. I tend to work both internally and externally. Um, when I was doing, for instance, Dog Day Afternoon, I walked around the house in clogs to get a feeling for what it was like to walk around in heels, since I was playing somebody who was a would-be transsexual. I plucked my eyebrows, I let my hair grow, and we teased it up a bit just to get that sense of look. I actually spent a day in New York City walking around in character, thinking that I would get a sense of the real life character who was in the who I portrayed in the movie, getting a sense of her life being looked at, stared at, um, a figure of some derision maybe. And I went into New York City on that day, and literally nobody turned a head. New York City people are famously jaded when it comes to unusual appearances. And they took no notice of me, so that didn't really work. Um, as far as other roles are concerned, again, it depends on the writing. A lot of times, the writing does the work for you. If it's a good script, the Princess Bride script was brilliant. The Fright Night script was brilliant. And so I just sort of followed the lead. And also, if you're lucky enough to have a good director, where to take the character. Tom Holland helped me a lot on Fright Night, just sort of getting into that sense of this all-powerful being. Rob Reiner, etc. And I'll actually talk about a little bit about directors in a few minutes. So that's the answer to that question. It depends on the circumstances. If I could eat only one food for the rest of my life, what would it be? I think it would be chicken. I love chicken, and there's so many different ways you could cook chicken and fish. I like meat, okay, but I'm a big chicken eater and could just go after it. Well, not 7 days a week, but if it were the last thing on earth, I would have to, wouldn't I? Where and when did my passion for cooking and gardening start? Well, that's a twofold answer. The passion for cooking came and went, actually, because when I was a kid, as some of you may know, and we've talked about on my podcast, Cooking by Heart, by the way, chrissarandon.com, all the episodes are there. I grew up in a restaurant. My father owned a restaurant with his brother and the other brothers who worked there, and I worked there from the time I was 9 years old until I went away to college. And my mom was a very good home cook. So, and Greek life, very often, I'm Greek, obviously, my mother and my father both. My father an immigrant, my mother's parents immigrants. Then the Greek life revolves around food and the fellowship that food creates and the holidays. And so, and also my mom was very specific about, she had two sons and we were both expected to help in the kitchen, both with preparation and with scullery, with cleaning up, mostly with cleaning up, but also she wanted us to watch her so that in case my mother was very specific about this. She said, you're not going to have a woman taking care of you for the rest of your life. So learn how to do this, learn how to cook, learn how to iron, which I still find very meditative, interestingly. I'll sit and watch a baseball game and iron for hours on shirts and what have you. This is sort of beside the point. But at any rate, so my passion for cooking came from there, even though I wasn't really interested in being in the restaurant business. When I went away to college, for a while I was in a fraternity house, but then when I got more interested in acting than anything, I left and rented a room in an apartment with a wonderful old woman. She and I had separate bedrooms, and then we shared the kitchen. And I did all of my cooking there and sort of learned as I went. And then later, when I got married, basically following a lot of different cookbooks. And it was always kind of there at my fingertips because of my upbringing, I think. So that's where my passion for cooking started. My passion for gardening really came from we had a friend. We lived up in Westchester County, we being my ex-wife Susan and I, and the aforementioned Colleen Dewhurst lived nearby, and she had a couple of men working for her who were cooks and sort of major domos and took care of household stuff, etc. And they lived nearby, and they had a garden. And I was always a kind of tangentially interested in it because of my interest in food. And so I asked my friend, his name was Stuart Jensen, could I help in the garden? He said, of course, you can grab whatever you need from the garden. And I would work with Stuart in the garden. He knew a lot about vegetable gardening. And basically I learned everything, or a lot of what I know now, from Stuart. And then in successive homes over the years, I had a little garden in the house that I had nearby his house. And then I had a small garden when Joanna and I later moved to California, different marriage. And then when we came to live where we are now, I immediately started a garden. And then my daughter expanded the garden because she was going to be a gardener and a purveyor of organic food. She cleared the garden out with a partner of hers. So we made it larger. And then when my daughter moved out and went on to acupuncture school, I took over the garden, put in some raised beds, and the rest is history. I find it extremely meditative and very, what's the word I'm looking for? Soul enriching to work in the soil. I recommend it to everybody, as some of you who follow my posts online will know that it's an integral part of my life and a very important one. Next question. Were there struggles in starting the gardening process? Are there struggles still? Of course, there are always struggles in a garden because the garden changes all the time. The insect life, the pests that come in the garden this summer, for instance, first time I've ever had a lot of trouble with a critter, probably a raccoon. I could never catch it. I tried with a have-a-heart trap. That is a trap that allows you to capture the animal and then release the animal somewhere else so the animal isn't decimating your garden. And this raccoon, I think, was a raccoon, basically laid waste to my tomatoes this year. Everything I tried, baiting, I tried the have-a-heart trap. I left bait in the trap. The bait would be missing and the trap would be still open. No idea how it happened, but at any rate, a very brilliant raccoon, obviously. So the struggles are essentially about the changes from season to season. If the weather's hot, what do you do to protect your plants that are particularly sensitive, and starting to become more aware of that great old biblical, to everything there is a season. And with planting, that's very much the case. And I'm getting more aware of that now, which is easing my struggles. That is planting cold weather crops early in the spring, and then again later in the fall when they don't grow in the middle of the season, the summer. And also learning this from the great Alice Waters, who I did a podcast with, the founder of Chez Panisse restaurant and really the farm to table movement in this country. And she talks about this is all about seasons. And the restaurant that she originated was specifically geared toward only food that came at the right time, because that meant optimal ripeness and flavor. So I try to follow that precept at least more now than I used to. And I'm thinking more about it in the future. Next year, I'm going to try to get some sort of shielding for the lettuce plants who tend to wither in hot weather. The same with the peas, which are great cold weather crops. Plant kale at a different time because the insects seem to go after it at certain times of the year. There are all sorts of bromides about when to plant what, and I'm still learning. I was also asked how big my garden is. The plot, and I'm looking at it literally right now as I turn, in the opposite direction from what's on the screen. That's a little crazy, but at any rate, I'm looking in my backyard, and the garden is approximately 60 feet by 40 feet, which makes it about a 2,400 square foot garden. But there are raised beds in the garden that I put in a long time ago, like 10 years ago, of cedar, which lasts a long time, but also doesn't leach any chemicals into the soil. And I also have a compost, a triple compost bin, so that you can start the compost in one bin, and then as it decays, move it into the second one, and then the third for the final phase, adding mixtures of green plant leavings, that is scraps, with brown, that is leaves that are already on their way to decay, so that they mix together. And that's my garden. That's the size. And it says also, the question is, what's your favorite dish you make from the vegetables in your garden? That probably would be roasted vegetables, particularly beets, carrots, tomatoes as well. I roast tomatoes in this fall this year. No tomatoes, but I roast tomatoes in the fall to the point where they're slightly dehydrated, and then I freeze them, and I have them all winter for sauces, and they're great. And any vegetable that you put into roast with a little olive oil and salt in the oven for, I don't know, half an hour, 20 minutes at a reasonably high temperature, and you toss the vegetables. Oh, it brings out the sweetness and the flavor in those vegetables, particularly beets and carrots, but also potatoes, all sorts of vegetables. There's also a question about pizza or tacos. Well, I would have said at one point pizza, because we have a great pizza oven that we cook pizza in for the grandchildren and the family when everybody comes here, that's outside, but it's a wood oven, so it requires a lot of tending. But my wife and I are very partial to the tacos we make. We make hard shell tacos with turkey meat, with a really wonderful sort of mixture that you put in with it, spice mixture made by, I think, Siete. I'll give them a little plug here. And we chop up lots of different fresh vegetables to go on top. That is particularly lettuce, endive. We'll put in radicchio. We'll chop it up with, of course, cilantro. My wife makes a wonderful guacamole. And this is like a once a week treat for us that we always go for. So I would have to say now tacos, and even though I love pizza. Do I like to read? And who are some of your favorite authors is the question. Well, actually, right now I tend to, if a book really moves me and I find it a wonderful read, I'll go back to it every 10 years or so, because there was a reason why I was smitten by it in the first place. I'm a big fan of a man by the name of Patrick O'Brian, who wrote a series of sea novels called the Aubrey Maturin novels. And they are remarkable, something like 21 books. I go back and read those every 10 years. I'm not reading them right now, but I'm ready to. A writer by the name of Mark Helprin, who has written a couple of great books, one Soldier of a Great War, but the book that I love the most is Winter's Tale by Mark Helprin. I'm reading that again. It's a big, long one, but it's an extraordinary book. Anything by Gabriel Maria Marquez, Love in the Time of Solitude, all of his books. T.H. White, The Once and Future King, which is a book I keep going back to over the years, and so do my kids and my grandchildren. I'm now reading also a woman named Elena Ferrante, who's a great Italian writer who wrote a series of books that started with My Brilliant Friend. I just finished My Brilliant Friend, which I loved, and I'm going to go on to the sequel novels after I finish my reread of Winter's Tale, etc. So I hope that answered your question about some of the things, some of the books, some of the authors that I like. Next question. If I could be any animal, what would it be and why? I had to think about this one. And it came out that I thought maybe it was an elephant of all things. First of all, because I equate wisdom with elephants and also age. And that's where I am now in my life. I'm an older human being, not an elephant, of course. And I think of elephants as being wise creatures. They're also companionable. They're also familial. They're very, very, very tied to their families. They take care of their young with great vigor. And I feel very close to that. So that would be the animal, I think. Next question. Have you thought about doing a live cooking show in front of an audience for a one-off for a Cooking by Heart special? Cooking by Heart, by the way, for those of you who don't know, is my podcast that I'm just starting with season 3, with the first episode being my interview with Rosanna Arquette. That's a fabulous interview, by the way, really interesting about her childhood and her acting family and her being discovered when she was in her teens and having worked steadily through that time about the Me Too movement, etc. At any rate, the problem with a live cooking show, and I could conceivably do one-off, is the logistics of it, the camera, the audio, the video, the editing. It's a big deal. I have done live shows, but they're interview shows. I did several live shows at the Sacred Heart University Community Theater, the SU Theater in Fairfield, Connecticut, gorgeous, gorgeous theater, with Jacques Pepin, the great French chef, with Lydia Bastianich, the great Italian chef, with Alice Waters, the great American chef. I did one with Rocco DiSpirito, a live show at a school upstate in Connecticut. So I'm not a stranger to live shows. Oh, and my ex, Susan Sarandon, which I think probably a lot of you guys had a chance to watch, which was great fun. And they were great because it basically was just the principals and I sitting and talking. We talked about food, we talked about their youth, all of which were fascinating. And then several of them, the chefs, did book signings afterwards. And Susan went home. So the cooking, the one-off Cooking by Heart podcast, I think, is in my future at some point, but it requires a lot of organization. How long did it take me to get used to the energy of fans at Comic-Cons? I feel that this has been one of the great gifts of my life, being able to go to Comic-Cons. I get a chance to interact with fans. You know, you grow up in the theater as I did, and there is a symbiotic relationship with the audience. It's an interchange that occurs all the time. Whereas with Comic-Cons and live events, personal appearances, that's one-to-one. And I relish that because it really gives me a sense of exactly what the work that I do means in people's lives. And sometimes it's profound. I mean, I'm not taking credit individually for the movies that I made because they're made with, extraordinary sort of infrastructure. But, excuse me, that was lunch. But my, I think I'm still recording. Something happened with my computer. I'm sorry, folks. At any rate, and the interchange is very meaningful because it gives one a sense of exactly how important this business that I'm in is to people. How it, I have people say, whenever I'm in a bad mood, I put in The Princess Bride, or I put in The Nightmare Before Christmas, and watch it. And it changes my mood. It makes me happy to be alive. That's extraordinary. what we can be a part of in this business. So the the interchange is really important, and the energy of fans, to me, it sort of feeds my energy, and I love it. I love it. Um, and do you still find that energy fun and wild? I think I just answered it. Absolutely. It's an extraordinary thing to experience, and I'm lucky to be a part of it, I must say. And I keep doing them for that reason. If there is a true sequel to Fright Night, would you be up for bringing your version of Jerry to the screen? Well, folks, take a look. Vampires are not supposed to grow older. But the actors who play them, right? Okay. So I don't know. It would take a great leap of imagination for Tom Holland, who wrote and directed Fright Night, to come up with a sequel that would make sense for Jerry Dandridge to come back to life as an older man. If that's the case, then absolutely, I'd be thrilled to do it. Next question: would you consider being in future seasons or episodes of the new series of Chucky? As many of you may know, I was in the original Child's Play, playing Detective Mike Norris a long time ago in a very cold Chicago winter. And I guess Mike Norris by this time would be certainly retired. So if he'd made a return, I'm not sure how that would happen, but if the producers of the series were interested, absolutely, I'd love to take part. It would be great fun. And by the way, I did podcasts with Alex Vincent, who played the boy and who's now an extraordinary man, and Catherine Hicks and Brad Dourif, all of them on my podcast, Cooking by Heart. So check them out, okay? Do you have any directors you'd like to work with again? Yes. Of the ones who are still living, Rob Reiner, certainly, from The Princess Bride, who's one of the great audiences, first of all. I'll tell a quick story. I went to audition for Rob Reiner and Bill Goldman at Bill Goldman's apartment, and I walked in and was very upset about the New York Knicks. Something happened with the New York Knicks, and Bill Goldman happened to be a fan of the New York Knicks, and he and I started going at it, talking about the Knicks, and Rob finally interrupted us and said, "I think you better read," which was why I was there. And so I read, and when I finished what I thought was a very serious scene, Rob burst out in complete uninhibited laughter. And I looked at him and I went, that's the key to this movie. And that is, comedy is serious business. The scene that I interpreted as being a serious one, in which Prince Humperdinck tells Princess Buttercup, who is threatening suicide, that he would like to be an alternative to suicide. Rob gets the joke right away, but doesn't want to tell the audience it's a joke. Let the audience figure it out. That's why Rob's a great director. Also, I'm writing names down here. Mike Flanagan, whom I'm not directed with, I've not worked with, but Mike has become a sort of friend of mine. I've done a podcast with Mike. He's the director of Midnight Mass and The Fall of House of Usher, among other wonderful movies. I'd love to work with Mike sometime, and he knows that. Who else did I write down? Of course, Henry Selick and Tim Burton. How could I leave them out? Love to work with them again. So I have a list. Whether it will happen at this point in my life, who knows? The next question is, since you're a native of West Virginia, what was one of your favorite mountain dishes when you were growing up? There weren't many mountain dishes because I didn't have the opportunity to eat in people's homes who were, if you want to call it that, natives to West Virginia. My family moved there. My father came from Turkey and Greece. My mother came via Greece from Florida. So all the cooking at home, almost all the cooking at home was Greek. And in the restaurant, it was very sort of elevated diner food. Everything was made fresh, pies, the cakes. The entrees at lunch, there was a prefix lunch, and then my father butchered all the meat and used that for everything from burgers to steaks to what have you. It was a very eclectic menu. So as far as mountain dishes are concerned, I don't really have any in my repertoire, but I loved living there and still have a very strong feeling for that as where I came from and part of who I am. With the holidays around the corner, what are your favorite health dishes that the whole family will love? Now, first of all, they use the word health and holiday to me is an oxymoron because while I watch my diet almost all year, at holiday time I don't mess with whether there's too much fat, saturated fat in dishes, or sugar or what have you. That's the time when I splurge. I don't really think in terms of worrying about too much butter in the mashed potatoes or whole milk or the fat that you need for the gravy, the saturated fat. I'm sugar too, all the way. I make a wonderful cranberry relish every year, and you have to use a lot of sugar. That's just the way it is. So I look forward to an unhealthy holiday that will be followed by a year of health. How about that? Okay. What is the best and worst part of aging for you? Well, the worst part is waking up in the morning and basically having aches and pains everywhere. I've had a hip replacement. I've had a knee replacement. But the best part is also the accumulation of life that's occurred to this point, and the fact that I've been so fortunate in so many ways, both in my work and in my personal life. I have a fabulous family. I have a wonderful relationship with both of my ex-wives, and in a wonderful, just extraordinary relationship with Joanna. And that has informed how I feel about aging, which is that I'm an accumulation of all these things. There's a great Tennyson poem, and there's actually a question about poetry here, called Ulysses, in which Ulysses is an old man, and he's talking about the great adventures of his life and what's ahead of him. I can't quote the line, and in fact, I could look it up, and in fact, maybe I will look it up because it's a great line. Well, if you get a chance, Alfred Lord Tennyson, Ulysses, and check out the last stanza of that poem, and it says everything about life as you age that I hope will continue to be for me. What's my favorite scary movie? That's an interesting one. I give this answer a lot to people. There's a wonderful Scandinavian movie, or Scandinavian, yeah, the original one, Let the Right One In, about a couple of kids in Scandinavia, one of whom is a vampire. It's a great movie. It's been remade a number of times, but the original is really extraordinary and scary, but in a good way. And it also deals with a lot of sort of, cosmic questions about life in general. There's also a very creepy, scary movie that I remember from, I don't know, 40 years ago. I don't know if it's still scary, but it was at the time. And that is, I just blanked on the name of the movie. It's by Nicholas Roeg. Don't Look Now. Sorry. And it's a fabulous movie with Donald Sutherland and Julie Christie about their having lost a child. And so it has very sort of resonant qualities to it as well, but it's also real creepy. And I'm trying to think if there are any others that really I can think of. Not at the moment, but there are lots of great, great scary movies out there, folks. You know them. Next question. Can you tell us about Joanna's movie, The Grotto? How could I not? Because my wife, Joanna Gleason, Tony winner for Into the Woods, directed a movie called The Grotto, which she wrote. It was completed in 2022-23 and is about to be distributed in a limited distribution soon. And by the way, there's a trailer for it on people.com, The Grotto. Go look at the trailer. It's a fabulous movie. It's about a woman whose life changes radically when she's in her 40s. Her boyfriend passes away. I won't give anything more away except that she has a surprise in the will of her boyfriend that she has to deal with, and it changes her life. So and it's very funny, very wonderfully observed, and beautifully acted by a fabulous cast. So The Grotto, Joanna Gleason, I think you'll love it. People.com, look at the trailer. How's my knee doing post-op? Thank you for the question. It's great, actually. I still have some trouble at night just finding positions to lie in because it's not about the pain from the surgery. It's about the muscles around the knee that have to adapt to a whole new muscular and tendon dynamic because when you have a joint that's in bad shape, you compensate muscularly. And your muscles become, over the years, used to those patterns, and now it's finding a whole new paradigm for the muscles. So it's a work in progress, but it's much better than it was before the surgery, and I'm very happy I did it. When and why did I decide on growing my first food as a priority for me? And I think I talked about the history of the gardening and how it happened and how important it is to me. So thank you for the question. Let's see, a fan said, I'm almost finished with the Princess Bride book by Cary Elwes. Do you still see each other? And do you have a story about your time together? Hold on one second. I'm getting a message from my wife. Let me just text her. I will call her as soon as I'm off of this. At any rate, do you still see each other? Do you have a story about your time together? I don't have so much a story about our time together as I do about our friendship now. Cary and I, over the years, have developed a very strong friendship. We communicate fairly frequently. He just stopped by here on his tour. He was in my home state of Connecticut doing his show based on It's Inconceivable, Cary's story of The Princess Bride, and he does Q&A after a screening of the movie, and it's wonderful, the show, if it ever comes to your hometown. And Cary stopped off and had lunch with us, and we sat and talked for hours. He's a great friend, and I treasure his friendship. Do I have any superstitions? Not really. Every once in a while I'll knock on wood if I'm saying something that I hope will happen or I'm looking forward to. But generally speaking, I'm not the superstitious one in the family, and I'll leave it at that. What scares me? Not much, but disharmony, particularly the invective and the disharmony that's occurring right now in our country and really countries all over the world. Wars in places where it seems that they'll never end, particularly the Middle East. All of these things frighten me. Climate change frightens me. I don't dwell on it. I don't think about it all the time, but when I do, I'm afraid for not really my future, because my future is relatively short and the big question. I'm more of fear for my children and my grandchildren. And so I hope that the way forward is a more harmonious one, because we sure need it out there, folks. Let's see. What memories do you have of working on A Tale of Two Cities? Oh, wow. Well, I've talked about that in a number of instances in the past, because A Tale of Two Cities is really sort of a seminal experience in my life. I did it for the Hallmark Hall of Fame on CBS many years ago, and I was able to go to England and France and shoot it, playing both the characters of Sidney Carton, and Charles Darnay. And of course, one of the memories that I have very specifically is walking into the rehearsal room on the first day, and the cast was, for those of you who are fans of British acting royalty, the cast was David Suchet, who played Poirot on PBS, as the great detective, Billy Whitelaw, Kenneth Moore, Nigel Hawthorne, who was the Madness of King George, the great Nigel Hawthorne, Peter Cushing from the Hammer films. And my first memory walking into the rehearsal hall was Peter Cushing sitting there in a chair with a cigarette, and he had white gloves on except the tips of the fingers were cut off. And he had a cigarette burning down, I think, to keep the nicotine stains from his fingers. And he literally did this. He looked over at me and he said, "Why, hello, dear boy." And chills up and down my spine. So fortunate to have a chance to work with those people. And also the opportunity to play two different characters, which in my mind was, one of the pinnacles of my career, to be able to show that I'm a character actor and that I can play character roles and differentiate between two characters in the same scene. I played a lot of scenes with myself in it from the old days of when there was no CGI. So they literally put a cup over half the camera's lens and shot one side of the scene with the character over here. Pardon, I have to do this. I'm looking. Okay. And my playing the scene with the character that way. No, that way. Anyway, the opposite direction. And then they put the cup over the opposite side of the lens. And I changed clothes, went and sat down, and with a recording of the previous scene that I recorded of the first character, played the scene with that character. And it was just a great experience, and working with those people, feeling that I was the sort of driving engine of the show, but at the same time I was not really, because of these great actors. They were all, extraordinary presences. Peter Cushing played Dr. Manette, the father of, and I forgot Alice Crisian, who was Lucy, the young woman in Tale of Two Cities. So at any rate, it was a great, great shoot. We shot at Notre Dame in Paris. We shot all over Paris. We shot all over London. Great, great time in my life. I think I've covered almost every question. I know I'm rambling a lot, but that's the way it goes sometimes. And I don't obviously, with this recording, have the opportunity to have any feedback in a live Facebook, which, by the way, I'm still pissed off about. So I hope that those of you who submitted questions got your questions answered. I had fun just sitting here and doing this, and I'm looking forward to another Facebook Live at some point. So thank you so much for tuning in, and take care, everybody. I love you.